this is something that I have been wanting to do for a long time, and so this whole Transact experience has given me an opportunity to really talk about really my life in community development and the work that I have done over the last 40 years related to community economic development. What I want to do is I want to sort of not just make this a lecture, but make this a discussion. And so I want to encourage you all to ask me questions as we go through this. And I'm going to give different vignettes of things that have happened to me during the same time, trying to put it in the context of a time frame of public policy related to community economic development and how I think it has shaped the work that we do now. And so I'm going to go back to 1949, which is the seminal legislation that was created in housing. Now, at that time, I was not doing this work, so let's get that straight, okay? 1949 was sort of the seminal legislation that set forth a public policy around housing and community development. And it was where the goal was set for 10 million new home ownership opportunities to be created in this country over, at that time, a 20-year period. So that was 1949. We're now into the year 2007, and we still are working against that same benchmark. And it's constantly referred to in a lot of publications around 1949 legislation. The other thing, so that was a major thing that sort of structured and has guided us, and there's been certainly amendments to legislation, but that has been the major piece of the sort of the backdrop for housing community development. In 1950, moving just from that period, in the sort of early 1950s, was the beginning of the Community Urban Renewal Program. And it really started as a result of an editorial that appeared in the Washington Post that talked about challenging the Congress, and it was called A View from the Capitol. And what it was simply doing was saying to the Congress, how in the world can you possibly sit where you sit and see the deploring conditions that people are living in right in Southwest Washington and not do something about it? And so legislation was approved at that time creating the Urban Renewal Program. Now, if we were to go back before 1949, there was legislation then that was called the Green Act, and it talked about alley dwellings. And there's a big issue around alley dwellings and conditions, so it goes back before 49. But this is, I'm taking you up now, 49, 50, sort of in my period and perspective of my knowledge about what was happening. So in 1950, we saw legislation to create the Urban Renewal Program. And that was very important because it did shape a lot of what came after that, because and also a lot of conditions that we faced in communities. What was happening in Southwest Washington in the early 50s was that 45% of the housing in Southwest had no indoor plumbing. It had no indoor actual floors. People were on floors that were just made of dirt, no indoor plumbing. So it was conditions that were typical of what you would think about in rural America that was happening. But it was happening right in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. And so they went into this area. And the way the Urban Renewal Program was structured, that it was a period of time when the federal government gave to communities initially a planning grant to go into an area, to begin to define an area that met certain kind of basically poverty indexes, conditions in terms of physical conditions, and talked about developing a strategy for how you address the redevelopment of those areas. So the Urban Renewal Program, as originally structured, was a major strategy that said the only way you're going to change conditions, for example, in Southwest Washington, was to go in and use the power of eminent domain to acquire every piece of land within the definition of the boundaries that were defined as the urban renewal area, and to relocate the people from those areas, and then to take on a major redevelopment of a major area. And that's how you're going to create change. And let's keep that in context, because that's very important to think about how this has shifted and changed and where we are today. But so Southwest Urban Renewal was designed. Bounds were created. The federal government gave to the Urban Renewal Authority, created in the district government under district law, funding to carry out the implementation of the plan that they had approved using what was called Title I funding. And that was what started the process in the District of Columbia. This was an area that was approximately 650 acres. That's how big an area this was. And what was interesting was that at that time, there was some public housing that was located in this area. And so the boundaries eliminated the public housing. It took everything but the public housing and went around and did that. So it's like almost like it gerrymandered out the public housing. And what happened is that there was massive displacement of people from this area. People were relocated. At that time, what happened, there were really no policies at that time or resources that supported the movement of those families. They simply went in, acquired, paid fair market value. In most cases, this land was not owned by the people who lived on it. These were absentee owners who owned it, allowed it to exist in the condition it was. And so basically, the funding was used to buy out, literally at that time, what you could say is slumlords today. And that land was purchased, and there was a strategy for how to redevelop it. Now, urban renewal took on a national reputation and people started calling it Negro removal, because it moved, majority of the people who lived in this area were all black, low-income people. And they moved them out, and if you go into Southwest today and see it, and when it was redeveloped, it is all middle and upper income housing, government buildings, some retail shopping, some redevelopment around the Southwest waterfront. But the people who were the ones impacted by the public action had no capacity to come back to this area. As the way it was developed. And at the time you remember, I said, well, that's just terrible. But at that time you remember, there were no programs that provided or opportunity to pay people or cared about where they went to. So you get into this whole thing, there are a lot of this discussion we're going to talk about is two things. It talks about people and talks about place. And clearly, the urban renewal program was a place strategy. It said that the place had to be redeveloped, and it had no real remedies for dealing with the people who were being displaced. And so where did these people go to? Where they went to were other areas that provided a means for them, either with family, if they lived in the area, or there were areas where they could find affordable housing within their range of affordability. So you saw a lot of overcrowding occurring wherever they went to. And so we really were creating sort of the next areas of public investment from the standpoint of you were going to deal with the same conditions that you were finding in Southwest. And so what came out of this effort was the Uniform Relocation Act, which was an act passed by Congress that said that two things this act dealt with. The Uniform Acquisition and Relocation Act was called, because it dealt with both acquisition and relocation. It said that for any land acquired using the eminent domain, you have to pay fair market value for the land that was acquired. And so you had to go through a public process of appraising the land, determining what the price and value was, and you had to pay the owner the fair market value. And secondly, it said that those persons who are affected by the relocation from those areas have to be paid a certain amount of money for both relocation benefits to and from where they're going to. They have to be paid, if they're the owners, they have to be paid in addition moving expenses besides fair market value if they own the property. And so for the first time, there was legislation that said, we have got to be concerned about the people.
What year?
This was the Uniform Relocation Act was about 1964, 65, somewhere around that time. Was when that was created. Now, in the interim, in the District of Columbia, Southwest was the first one. The next urban renewal area they created was the one called Columbia, I forgot the last part of it, but it was located in the area still in Southwest, but around what is today Watergate. And this again was another higher income, and it was done under what they called pockets of poverty. Because the area around it were all middle income housing, but it was this one sort of low area that was a pocket with a lot of poverty in it. And so they went into this area and redeveloped it, and the very same thing that happened in Southwest happened here. The people with low income, they got relocated from here, and again, with no benefits. And the other thing that happened that is important, there was no existing public program that assisted developers in being able to build back housing, with the exception of public housing, for low and moderate income people.